What if I told you that Iran just walked straight into a trap? A trap so perfectly designed, so carefully laid out that by the time they realized what was happening, it was already too late. This isn't a theory. This is what actually went down in the Strait of Hormuz, and the full story is something the mainstream media is barely covering. Stay with me because the next 11 minutes are going to completely change how you see this situation. You're watching Oksamu. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now and smash the like button because 20-second your times.
The tension between Iran and America is reaching a whole new level, and the world is divided. But the real question is, who do you stand with? America has official live voting open right now to see where the public support lies. If you love America and want to show your support, go to the description or the pinned comment right now. If you are using an Android, click the Android link, and if you are on an iPhone, click the iOS link. Just complete the quick 1-minute verification to make your vote count officially, and let's show the strength of America. Go vote now.
We cover the stories that actually matter, the ones with real consequences for real people. And today's story is one of the biggest of the year. Do not click away, because the twist in this story comes later, and you're going to want to be here for it. Let us start at the beginning, because to understand what happened in Hormuz, you have to understand why the strait matters so much. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow waterway sitting between Iran and Oman. It is roughly 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, and through that tiny stretch of water flows almost 20% of the world's entire oil supply. 20%. Think about that for a second. Every time you fill up your gas tank, there's a real chance that oil passed through Hormuz at some point. It is not just important. It is one of the most strategically critical choke points on the entire planet. Iran knows this. Iran has always known this. For decades, Tehran has used the Strait of Hormuz as its most powerful bargaining chip. Whenever tensions rise, whenever sanctions tighten, whenever Washington starts applying pressure, Iranian officials walk up to the microphone and say the same thing. We can close Hormuz. We can shut it all down. And for a long time, the world took that threat seriously, because on paper, Iran does have the capability to cause serious disruption in those waters. They have fast attack boats, anti-ship missiles, naval mines, and a Revolutionary Guard naval force that has spent years training specifically for operations in the Gulf. So, when tensions between the United States and Iran started escalating again this time around, the world braced for another round of Hormuz threats. Shipping companies started getting nervous. Oil markets started twitching. Analysts started running the same old scenarios they always run when Iran flexes its muscles in the Gulf. And right on cue, Iran started making moves. They increased their naval patrols. They made loud statements about their ability to control the waterway. They positioned assets and signaled strength. It looked from the outside like Iran was preparing to play its favorite card one more time. But here's where the story gets interesting, because what Iran did not realize, or maybe what Iran chose to ignore, is that the United States had been preparing for exactly this moment. Not just preparing specifically, methodically, and with a level of strategic depth that Iran completely underestimated. The Americans had spent months quietly repositioning assets, updating their wargaming scenarios, and most importantly, changing the rules of engagement in ways that Iran had not fully accounted for. Washington was not reacting to Iran this time. Washington had already written the next 3 chapters of the story before Iran even started making its first move. The trap had 3 layers, and each one was more calculated than the last. The first layer was economic. The United States coordinated with its Gulf partners, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, to ensure that any Iranian attempt to disrupt Hormuz traffic would immediately trigger a pre-planned response from alternative oil routes, the pipelines, the alternative shipping corridors, the emergency reserve releases. All of it was already mapped out and ready to activate within hours. If Iran closed Hormuz, the world's oil supply would not collapse. It would reroute, and Iran's leverage would evaporate almost instantly. The Americans had essentially taken the most dangerous bullet out of Iran's gun before the showdown even started. The second layer was technological, and this is where things get really fascinating. The US Navy has significantly upgraded its electronic warfare capabilities in the Gulf region over the past couple of years. We are talking about systems capable of disrupting Iranian communications, interfering with their drone coordination, and degrading the effectiveness of their fast boat swarm tactics, which have historically been one of Iran's most potent tools in confined waterways like Hormuz. Iran's military planners had built their Hormuz playbook around certain assumptions about what their equipment could do and how the Americans would respond. Those assumptions were now dangerously outdated. The third layer was the one Iran perhaps least expected, the diplomatic and informational layer. The United States had quietly built a coalition of partners who were all watching the Strait of Hormuz situation very closely and were prepared to immediately and loudly condemn any Iranian action. This mattered more than it might sound, because Iran's strategy in Hormuz has never been purely military. It has always been partly about narrative, about projecting strength, about showing the region and the world that Tehran cannot be pushed around. If the diplomatic response was already loaded and ready to fire the moment Iran made a move, Iran would not just lose the military engagement, it would lose the narrative war too, which for a country like Iran, operating under international pressure, might actually be worse. So, what did Iran do when they finally started to realize the trap was closing around them? This is the part that reveals everything about the current state of Iranian strategic thinking. Instead of pulling back cleanly and quietly, Iran doubled down first. They escalated their rhetoric. They made more noise. They conducted naval exercises designed to send a message. And for a moment, it almost looked like they might actually go through with a serious provocation. The tension in the Gulf during that window was genuine. Markets moved, navies repositioned, the world held its breath. And then everything collapsed. Not in an explosion, not in a military confrontation, but in something almost more revealing. Iran blinked. The provocative posturing quietly faded. The naval exercises wrapped up without incident. The threats stopped being repeated. And the Strait of Hormuz, that tiny 21-mile choke point that Iran had been waving over everyone's heads like a weapon, remained open, remained functional, remained in every practical sense outside of Iran's control. Now, here's what the mainstream coverage gets wrong about this moment. Most of the reports treated this as a non-event. Oh, nothing happened. The crisis passed. Let us move on. But that framing completely misses what actually occurred. Something very significant did happen. Iran tested the strategic environment and discovered that the playbook they have relied on for decades no longer works the way it used to. They telegraphed a move. They set up for a confrontation. And then they discovered that the Americans had already accounted for every piece on the board. That is not just a tactical loss. That is a strategic revelation that changes everything about how Iran can project power going forward. Think about what Iran's leadership now has to reckon with internally. The Strait of Hormuz threat has been central to Iranian strategic deterrence for a generation. Military planners in Tehran have built budgets, training programs, and political positions around the idea that Hormuz is the trump card. The one thing that gives Iran real leverage against Western pressure. If that card is now significantly less powerful than they thought, it forces a massive internal reckoning. What is the backup plan? Where does the leverage come from now? These are uncomfortable questions. And uncomfortable questions inside authoritarian systems do not usually produce clean, rational outcomes. They produce internal conflict, blame games, and sometimes dangerous overreactions. And that is actually one of the most important things to watch going forward, not just what Iran does externally, but what happens inside the Iranian decision-making structure as different factions try to explain what just happened and what to do next. The hardliners will push for more aggression. The pragmatists will push for recalibration. The supreme leadership will have to navigate between those pressures, while also managing an economy that is genuinely struggling under sanctions, and a population that is not exactly rallying around the flag right now. It is a combustible internal situation, and the Hormuz miscalculation just made it more combustible. Meanwhile, the Gulf Arab states are quietly drawing their own conclusions from all of this. Countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE have spent years hedging their bets, maintaining relationships with the United States, while also keeping back channels open with Iran and exploring partnerships with China and Russia. They're always calculating where the real power in the region sits, and what they just witnessed in Hormuz is another data point telling them that Iranian power has real limits. Limits that American strategic planning actively shapes and enforces. That calculation matters enormously for the regional balance of power and for decisions that Gulf states will make about defense spending, diplomatic alignment, and economic partnerships in the coming years. There's also a China dimension here that almost nobody is talking about. Beijing has been investing heavily in the Middle East, cultivating relationships with both Iran and the Gulf states, and positioning itself as an alternative to American influence in the region. China imports enormous amounts of oil that flows through Hormuz. Any serious Iranian disruption of the Strait would hurt China just as badly as it hurts the West, maybe more so in some scenarios. This creates a fascinating dynamic where Chinese pressure on Tehran to behave responsibly in Hormuz actually serves American strategic interests, even without any formal coordination. The United States and China have a shared interest in keeping Hormuz open, and Iran has to navigate a world where even its supposed partners have reasons not to back its most extreme moves. Here is the bigger picture that ties all of this together. What we watched unfold in the Strait of Hormuz was not just a single episode of geopolitical tension that came and went. It was a stress test of Iran's strategic position, and Iran did not pass. The trap worked because it was not just military, it was economic, technological, diplomatic, and informational all at once. That kind of multidimensional strategic approach is genuinely difficult to counter, especially for a country like Iran that is already operating under significant resource constraints and internal political pressures. Iran walked in thinking it was playing its strongest card. It walked out realizing the card has been significantly downgraded. Now, does this mean Iran is finished as a regional power? Absolutely not. Iran still has proxy networks, still has influence in Iraq, Yemen, Lebanon, and Syria, still has ballistic missile capabilities that nobody in the region takes lightly, and still has a leadership that is ideologically committed to resistance against American and Israeli influence. The country is not going away, and it is not about to become a cooperative partner in some new regional order. But what this moment does mark is a meaningful shift in the confidence and effectiveness with which Iran can project power in its most critical domain. And that shift has ripple effects that will play out for years. If you have made it this far, you already know that Oksamu is where you come for the real analysis. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, because we are just getting started on this story. The decisions Iran makes in the coming months, whether to recalibrate, escalate, or try to find a diplomatic off-ramp, will shape the entire trajectory of Middle East security. The decisions that Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states make about what just happened will further reshape the regional landscape in ways that are genuinely hard to predict right now. What you just watched was not a crisis that ended quietly. It was a turning point that most people are not recognizing as a turning point yet. And that is exactly the kind of story that Oksamu exists to bring you. The real analysis, the deeper context, the stuff that actually helps you understand what is happening in the world and why it matters to you. Before you leave, drop a comment below and tell us, do you think Iran will recalibrate after this? Or do you think we are heading toward an even bigger confrontation down the road? I want to read your take on this. And if this video gave you something to think about, share it with someone who needs to see it, because these conversations matter. The more people who are actually informed, the better. We will see you in the next one.